So, good morning and welcome back to our forum. Today is, this session is the last and final session of our forum. So, we'll promise, or at least we'll try to end it with a wonderful bang for everyone here today. So, we talked a lot about ideas. We talked a lot about propositions, insights, challenges, and recommendations that we can move forward with as we end the forum and begin the actual work that needs to be done. However, in order to do that, we needed to learn about how we can finance this because financing is a fuel that brings, so to speak, the car to where it needs to go. But at the same time, these kinds of things also rely a lot on communication, on talking, on partnering with other people in order to ensure that we actually get to the vision we're striving to work towards. We need each other. We need our enemies as much as we need our friends. And we need proper stakeholder engagements in order to really advance what we're trying to get at here. This forum was built on that. The fact that we need to converge, to come together in order to collaborate and boost our efforts and our impact. And that's why we're also ending this forum with a session on how exactly we might be able to do that. How might we be able to engage stakeholders from across the globe, across the community, and across, cultures, perspectives, and insights, so that we can all come together and foster a sustainable and inclusive agricultural system. And so joining me here today, as if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm the moderator. Joining me here today is a wonderful panel of experts and I say professionals in the field. So we have Sir Insan, Miss Bibong, and of course Sir Clemens joining us live. And we have Miss Bibong joining us online. So everyone, let's please give them a round of applause before we start the conversation. So here's the mic. Please do feel more than free. But let's kick the session off very casually. So I'll start, of course, with you, Sir Insan. So your work, for instance, in Pisagro has a lot to do with facilitating partnerships. It's in your organization's name in the first place. Could you tell us more about how this came about? And from my understanding, Pisagro focuses on creating a multi-stakeholder platform that facilitates partnerships all across Indonesia. I want to know what makes your platform different and what makes it work in facilitating these multi-stakeholder dialogues.
Thank you for the opportunity. Hi, everyone. It's Insan Shafaat from Pisagro. Pisagro stands for Partnership for Indonesia Sustainable Agriculture. So essentially that is about partnership. It was established a decade ago, 2012, in support for the government. So we're established because we wanted to support the government for the food security. And how that we're doing it is to help increase the welfare of the smallholder. So I'm very pleased to be here because I've been hearing a lot since I just came here this morning about smallholders and how we're going to help them and giving them accesses that they need. Pisagro is then established to provide a lot of accesses that because we need smallholders need access of input materials, access of market, access of capacity building, and of course access to finance that have been talking about it from the previous sessions. What we're doing it then, how Pisagro is helping the smallholder is, if you can take a look at the screen, I think I've shared, there's a model that we're pushing for. Yeah, so it's called the Inclusive Closed Loop Model. Essentially, I believe that it gives the highest guarantee. It gives us certain ease for the smallholders to give these accesses. We connect smallholders under the cooperative because we know that cooperative is like this at least the form of organizations that they could have, and we connect them with lots of accesses, not directly, but we connect them with the stakeholders who provide those accesses. So for instance, governments at national or regional or provincial levels or municipal levels, then we connect them with partnered companies who are providing long-term partnership with these smallholders, including access to off-taking, access to global markets, access to input materials, fertilizer, seedlings, and whatnot. Access to digital and technology, and of course, access to finance. We connect them with the banks and everything. So I think that's how that we're doing it at Pisagro. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Insan. Sir Clemens, you have a breadth of experience from Thailand to Laos to Myanmar. And as an anthropologist yourself, I know that you know how to scientifically engage with different people, foster partnerships. I want to know, tell us more about your work, your experiences, and perhaps any tips and tricks from, say, anthropology that you think you've used over the years to really facilitate partnerships all across the SDGs.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Clemens, I work for the Australian government, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. We're a government agency and we're part of the Australian Aid Program. As in my agency, obviously our partners are other governments in our partner countries, Philippines being one of them, and a very strong one as well. However, I think we've seen, my agency exists for the last 40 years, and we've seen that the engagement government to government is good and important, and we share values and experiences, and we're able to get some, transfer of technologies, innovation going. However, the engagement is limited. We need to go deeper and wider and deeper, which is we need to include other sectors of the society, and we need to reach the farmer level. And rather than, as it was done, or probably is still being done to a certain extent. So the way ACR, which is the abbreviation, the way we design our programs is that we have government-to-government consultations, and then we develop a country strategy for that particular government. So, for example, in the Philippines, now with the new government, the new country strategy would definitely include things like land ownership. It would include things like food security. Like, even though it's a strong agricultural country, there's still pockets that suffer from food security. That shouldn't be the case, right? And it would probably include things like how to get new knowledge, new innovations, new solutions down to the farmer level through the agriculture extension system, which is clearly not as effective as it could be, like in many other countries. However, we're now at the point where we need to think about including more actors, as I said before. So we've been overlooking for far too long, and they've probably been overlooking us, the private sector, right? It seems to me like sometimes we're in completely parallel universes. And if I listen to the last session, we were talking about, oh, the policy needs to change, and we're always saying, oh, the private sector needs to go along with what we're trying to do, right? So there's definitely a lack of communication there. And the other is the civil society. To me, the civil society is responsible for social progress. Again, in the last session, it was mentioned, policy is often reactive, as are markets. They're reactive to things that are already happening, right? And the sector of society that's responsible for social progress is often started in the civil society, So in order to stay on the cusp, we need to definitely urgently include them in our programs. So rather than government to government, we need to go wider and deeper. That's what I.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And for instance, we have with us Miss Colleen here, who has been working with, say, smallholder farmers. I wouldn't say all your life, but for a good chunk of it. So you mentioned, Sir Clemens, that there's a need to engage smallholder farmers in the discussion, not just government to government, not just say the private sector. So, Miss Colleen, how have you been doing that through the course of your work, and how do you think we can do that best? How can we highlight or emphasize those last mile stakeholders in the chain?
Yeah, so actually, I would like to answer that by explaining what we are doing in Bayan Anihan. So Bayan Anihan is actually born from the mission of Gawad Kalinga to help our poor kababayans, which are mostly the farmers of this country, of the Philippines. And Bayan Anihan is actually more than just an enterprise. It's a vision and it's a framework that we want to establish so that we can build the ecosystem that is needed for us to help the farmers. Because as Kuya Luis is always saying, no, for those of you who knows Kuya Luis, hard work is really not enough. Okay, because we always say that the farmers should just do more hard work so that they can uplift their lives, no. But and we are always judge the poor people that are lazy, you know. But that's not the case that we see in with them. And also, if it's just about hard work, no, our farmers are really hardworking. They are waking up early in the morning, no. So who among us are waking as early as 3 a.m. for them to go to the farm, diba? And if hard work is just all it takes to for them to get rich, then they should have been the richest class in our society. So it's actually
Please jangan ngomong deh.
hard work is not enough, and that's why Bayan Anihan is existing for us to be able to create that support ecosystem for them to uplift their lives. And this frame ecosystem, this is an end-to-end support system that we are establishing from the production to the processing and to the market. Okay, so and the base of this and the most critical work that we need to do is the organizing. It's organizing our farmers. Okay, that's why we have this what we call the CBEs, or the community-based enterprises, which is created with CEO. Okay. We have CEO, not the chief executive officers, but we call it community enterprise organizers, which these are the young farmers that we have, and we are training them to be leaders of these community-based enterprises. And we give them the training, and we support them with the mentoring that they need. And because we've tried trading before, no, with vegetables. However, we experience a lot of difficulties with that because of the nature of pole vaulting the farmers, and as well as the sustainability of the quality that they need to supply to our buyers, no. That's why we saw the necessity to really organize our farmer and to have a leader, no, a leader to hold them and to guide them as well. And that's the role of the CEO that we are creating.
Thank you, Ms. Colleen. So I think what we notice is that there's a lot of work in organizing, whether it's farmers or whether it's different stakeholders. And we have on Zoom here today Ms. Bibong, who also has work in agriculture, but who works as well in the an organization that actually bridges partnerships within more than 60 organizations. So I think on another level, we see collaborations within that organizational level, which we haven't really touched on during this discussion. So Ms. Bibong, can you tell us more about the work your organization does and how you foster partnerships within different organizations, which I think might have conflicting interests, even if they belong in the same sector, might have different perspectives or whatnot. So please do tell us more about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your. My name is Bibong. I want to explain what the IOR are already doing. We have a member from the farmers, especially for small scale farmers, activists, and then the academic. And then we are collaboration with from the private sector. And the first IOR, we have for the last week, we already to make a yearly meeting with our members, especially farmers. We have 3 points that we have for concentration for 2 years. The first is how we can trouble about the farmer institution, especially cooperative groups and small. And then we have to work with the stakeholder at the village and then province level, especially in government and private sector. For strengthening the capacity of farmer, we have to priority for regeneration of the farmers, especially young farmers, to regeneration about the knowing about the local wisdom, how the agriculture can work well, especially regarding local indigenous seed and then sustainable agriculture. And the second, we work in support we need the support from the consumer. So we organize as consumer who are accepted to be able to our product from our farmer with CSR, consumer supported agriculture. That's especially for organic and local product. That is must be made to be inclusive. So that the healthy product can be reached by all level society and then backgrounds. We have give a point for the consumer. We are going to be consumer education. This is an important thing that is challenge so that I can reach all member, all population in small and a big city with different knowledge and then income level background. And then we are going to collaborate with especially for stakeholder, including academic. So in this point for the second point to supporting consumer is very important. And then the level 3 is how to build a community-based guarantee with the multi-stakeholder and participatory guarantee system. Organic products certainly cannot be spared with guarantee. We think that PGS is a guarantee model that is sustainable, suitable for smallholder and then can be reached by all levels because it's carried out of bio-element involved the carry out of participatory way. This guarantee is priority at the local level. And then IOR already produced the PGS we called PAMOR since 2008 with and then we are growing until now. I think this is the 3 points that IOR already doing for our members and then our farmers.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what I've noticed from all across our panel here is there's a lot of emphasis in terms of providing access, in terms of bridging different stakeholders together, and as well as, I guess, the presence of a lot of gaps that still exist. So I'm confused actually, because right here we have a lot of different stakeholders coming from a lot of different sectors. And I'm pretty sure this isn't the first forum in the world to do that. And we've been trying to communicate with each other for generations now. And yet you are all here in front of me today saying we're still not talking enough. The government to government system still needs farmers. Farmers still need to organize themselves. You're telling me, sir, that you're providing access, but of course, there's still a need to strengthen that. And of course, Ms. Bibong here is also saying that we need more mechanisms in order to facilitate partnerships, because on the consumer side, they're also not entirely getting the big picture. So what's missing? Why are we still not communicating with each other well enough, despite the availability of technology, of these forums, and of the intention to do so? So actually, I'm putting this as an open question to anyone who'd want to kick that conversation off. Well, so he grabbed the mic and then I'll go to you.
Nothing is missing. It's just, I think, a matter of commitment. In our cases, I think in the way that I'm doing our partnership, because PISAGRO is a private-led association, so our member are essentially, most of them are coming from the companies, private companies, from multinational, large to startups. In the way that we're establishing partnerships with other stakeholders is starting with the commitments from the governments. We need the long-term commitments. We need governments to be the front running of the partnerships, because essentially companies, at least PISAGRO's member, are doing silos projects, right? They're doing what they are doing, business as usuals, within their supply chains at areas where they're operating at. But we need bigger commitments to gather more stakeholders to be doing in terms of a landscape, right, at scale. So I think that's it. The commitments, we need it. That commitments, a long-term commitment, support, enabling environment, enabling support, at least from the government, starts with the governments and then supported by the other actors.
Sir Clemens?
Thank you. It's good that you're confused, because confusion is the first step of learning. And we all need to learn. It's not just you that are confused, that's for sure. But I would say, and I think this is a good segue. I agree, it needs to start with governments and with policy, especially. What we do forget sometimes is that there is a lot of policy out there already, and there has been progress. So there's an ASEAN GAP, Good Agriculture Practice standard, right? Not everybody's following it, but the standard is there. You just need to follow, right? There are many national policies. I know about Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, where they have sustainable agriculture policy in place. Is it implemented? That's the second question, right? And I think for this step, of course, policies need to be improved all the time. They need to be evaluated. It needs to be checked whether they actually support the people that they're supposed to support, and not make things worse, or make things worse for other sectors of the society. So that's a constant process. But in terms of implementation, we need that engagement of partners. We need the private sector to provide solutions, innovations down to the local level, right? As I said before, we need the civil society to be able to what's the word? Get community action going. You know what I mean? And start accepting these things, or also even communicating the needs of farmers to governments and so on. So this is, I mean, it's no surprise that we have a session on multi-stakeholder partnerships, because that's the big missing link here. You know, there's policies in place, there's technological solutions in place, there's community activism going on, but who's going to connect all this? And of course, each of these groups are arrogant and think, oh, we got the solution. We just have that magic bullet. Just if everybody starts eating vegetarian, then all the problems will be solved. We know that's not the case, right? But everyone has a bit of the truth. And if we bring it together, then we might get to some higher form of learning.
Mr. Insan, given that Clemens here said that there are already policies in place, any feedback in terms of like the private sector? I know you wanted to say something.
No, essentially commitments is first, but then when Clemens mentioned about these people are arrogant, you're absolutely right. But then we need mechanisms, right? How to contribute to a certain partnerships. Essentially, as representations of many companies, sometimes we get nervous when we want to contribute to certain initiative or programs. We don't know what to. I mean, we're doing what we're doing essentially, business as usual. We're helping a smallholder within our supply chain. But how about smallholders who are outside our supply chains? How about smallholders who are sitting in non-legal areas? Because companies will not be helping them if there is no mechanisms to support them, right? So we need some sort of guidelines, and these guidelines need to be established within coming from all stakeholders involved in certain areas.
There's Sir Insan. I can just butt in and ask. So there are guidelines from, say, the government level and policy making, but I want to ensure, Ms. Colleen, for instance, you work a lot with the stakeholder farmers that Sir Insan and the private sector would want to also support. What's your take on it? Are you being consulted when it comes to the guidelines being made? And are you being listened to? Because I'm sure you're also trying to get your voice heard by the private sector. So how's that going? Are you being listened to? And if not, what's missing in the way you're interacting with either the government or the private sector?
Based from the experience that we have, actually, we just for us, for the question earlier, no, I don't know really what's missing. It's just that we are trying, we are working hard to connect. Like when, as I said earlier, we do the farmer organizing, right? But when we organize the farmers, we actually include the LGU, and when we talk with the mayors, with the government officials, they actually have the heart to help their constituents. And sometimes they just don't know where also to, how to help them, or where to, where do they want to spend the funds that I have. So actually, that's what we are creating in Bayan Anihan. That's what we are creating in Gawad Kalinga, so that we can have that, maybe that's the mechanism that we have, and the framework that we have in Bayan Anihan of an end-to-end process of helping the farmers and then building the productivity hubs. Actually, one of the another key feature of, not feature, but part of this framework that we are building in Bayan Anihan is the productivity hub, because this is where we can scale, this is where we can consolidate the small farmers and connect them to a larger market. Because we, with the network of that we have, like here, there are a lot of opportunities actually. So we are actually forging that path. I think that anybody here can just look at where can we put ourselves in here, and maybe if they can replicate that framework that we are creating in their own areas or countries, then that I think is it's great.
Miss Bibong, anything to add in terms of the challenges you often face when it comes to communicating with other groups or stakeholders and ensuring partnerships all across?
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. We have a very, very big challenge to connecting with the private sector. Private sector in the local region, and then the government level in the local region. But in the 2 years later, we have in 2 years later, we are already collaboration with them by make a local market with and in the every region, especially in West Java, Central Java, North Kalimantan, West Sulawesi, and etc. So the farmers can hand to hand to sell their product, with the standard that we are already they have with the multi structure of the multi pihak stakeholder with the local farmers, consumers, and then indigenous people. We have already hand-to-hand with the indigenous people. Why? Because the local product or our local food must be to be important, focus on maintain a biodiversity. Because organic, we have a big challenge to maintain our local food diversity. So we must do hand-to-hand with the others. And then I think we need the process and we need a time to look at how about the process is going on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bibong. So I think the challenges are relatively the same, no? Just in different perspectives. And I guess at this point, what I want to ask is, and you can do this like really quickly, right? But if I were to create a wish list, if you were to create a wish list of things you want in order to enable you, I guess, to communicate to the people you want to in the way you want to, what would it be? For instance, given your experience with smallholder farmers with the private sector, you say there are still difficulties. One is through the policies, the lack of policies. But if you were to create a wish list, what would you need right now in order for you to facilitate the partnerships that you want? And from whom would you need it from?
It's a very hard question. Yeah. We're at Pisagro, we're not actually speaking directly with the smallholder. We facilitate our members to speak with, communicate with the smallholder. But essentially, what Pisagro can do is to encourage this model, the inclusive cluster models, and we make sure that our members are implementing that, and make sure that what they're facing difficulties in terms of communication with the smallholder is being discussed with us. But what we can do to communicate to the smallholder is essentially to convince. We need smallholder, our friends, not as competitors, is to believe in what we're doing to create these partnerships, because it's for them eventually. Towards the end, we want them to have the same yield as the company producing at the same level. We want to produce in palm oil the same amount of the volume of the palm oil. In potato, the same amount of kilograms that they can produce. And the way that we're doing it is to make sure that our friends are using the same ingredients, essentially, from the seedlings, from the pet fertilizer, making sure that smallholders are the products are being offtaken, and so on and so forth. So yeah, we need just them to believe in us, because this is what we're doing is for them. Sometimes we find difficulties when communicating certain programs on the ground, because we talk with not we our members talk with the smallholders, and essentially what they want to hear is how much that they could get at the end of the day, how much money that they can get, and the increase of the volume and whatnot. So we need to communicate in certain language that they could easily understand and they could get, and then eventually accept what we can offer to help them. That's it.
So to have them believe in you as well, as much as I hope you believe in them, because you do believe that there's a vision you're working towards. Either you, Miss Colleen or Clemens, what is your wish list? What would you need right now?
Yeah, so for us, maybe in Bayan Anihan, our wish list will be for everyone, and to share the risk of with the farmers, because one of the things that we have noticed really is that all the risk is with our farmers. When there is a typhoon and their crops are lost, the loss is all in them. So what we are doing is actually sharing the risk. We are venturing in an enterprise with them, and in that enterprise, it's actually a venture. It's not just we are giving and then asking us to and then asking them to give it back to us in the same amount, because it's only making the farmers yung sinasabi natin lalong nababaon sa utang. Parang utang
More and more in debt.
Okay, so yeah, so that's why first is for others also to share the risk with the farmers. The second is, of course, share in the hard work that we are doing in making a success stories with our farmers, especially with our young farmers, because as I've heard in the earlier discussion that who would want, diba? Who would, from our youngster, who would want to be a farmer? But maybe because they don't see any success stories in that. And that's what we want to create by creating our CEOs, our community enterprise organizers, a success story, so that more we can convince them with that success stories, not just convince them to be farmers, right? And the third one is actually share, include the farmers in your dream, in your personal dream. So what actually in Tagalog, no, paki-translate na lang. So yes, we can, kaya nating gawing mag-isa. Marami tayong kayang gawing mag-isa, pero sana piliin nating magsama ng iba, and that others, that iba is our farmers, our the poor people in our country.
The way I translate is basically we can always dream for ourselves, and we can always work for what we dream of for ourselves, but hopefully we can choose to dream for other people as well, and to include them in our dreams, so that together we could achieve greater in general. Sir Clemens, your wish list from the government, what do you need in order to make partnerships happen?
Well, I'd like to add on to what you just said. Not just share the risks, but also share the benefits. I think as long as farming is financially not viable, but we still expect them to produce our food, it's not going to work out, right? That's just simple economics, right? What drew me to this particular meeting was the sort of the keyword inclusive agriculture. We've been talking about sustainable agriculture for the last 20 years. That's fine, you know. And in a agronomic sense, we have an idea how that could work. But the inclusive part is just as important. And I think rather than expecting from farmers, you need to produce our food, you need to adapt to climate change, you need to produce the food cheaply so we have more and sufficient amounts, but you can stay poor, no problem, right? That's not inclusive, right? So we need to start listening, open our ears, but we also need to make sure that the system, the new system we're setting up, does not leave anybody behind. Meaning, we can't have any tolerance for poverty, no tolerance for breaching human rights. And we see this all around the Southeast Asian region, including women, not only in production as the pickers and as the laborers, but all the way up the value chain. And of course, as has been mentioned before, and this is also a process that we're going through in Australia, including our indigenous peoples in all sectors of the society. Not token, we can listen to you for 15 minutes and then we go on with our usual jobs, but including them in all sectors of society. So I think that would be key to real sustainability. Sorry.
I love that. I think if there's one key takeaway we'd want you guys to come home with, it's that at the heart of all of these partnerships, if we're talking about agriculture, it boils down to the people who actually make agriculture happen, which is the farmers. And yes.
Can I just add, there's a lot of people that don't own land, that are technically not farmers, but have a huge part in producing our food. So we need to include them to the landless.
Yes, definitely. And at the forefront and at the center of the conversation. And I guess we can transition off the wish list now, because the point I wanted to raise from there is that we all have things we want to ask from each other from, say, the table. And generally, it's something that the other can provide, but it's just a matter of asking for it, knowing whom to ask, and then having the other party listen to what needs to be heard. And I think that's something that was highlighted here today. And I'm curious, you all mentioned, Sir Clemens, Ms. Colleen, Sir Insan, you mentioned about how the farmers, the people who push forward really real agriculture on the ground, have to be at the forefront and at the center of the conversation, of the partnerships. But oftentimes, they're the least engaged with. We tell them what to do. We tell them these are the standards that we need you to comply with. As Sir Clement said, we have to be sustainable. We have to be green. We have to be like this, like that. But, just do that. And then whatever happens to you afterwards happens. How do we change that? How do we make sure that we actually mean it when we say they're at the center of it? How do we make sure that economically they're okay, that their needs are met, and that at the end of the day, last mile stakeholders doesn't mean last people consulted with when big decisions are made? Anyone can take the floor. Ms. Bibong, would you want to kick that conversation off? How do we make sure that the farmers, that our fisher folk, that those within the last mile are the ones that are actually highlighted and not left behind, not left without a voice? Or it's okay. Sir Clemens, Sir Insan?
Just very quickly. I'm putting a lot of faith in transparent and inclusive value chains.
Yes.
I think that's very important for consumers to know not just where the food comes from, but who reaps the benefit of producing this food. That would be the transparency, and the inclusive part is, like I said before, the benefit sharing part. It can't be that whatever crop it is worth almost nothing when it's harvested. But let's say coffee as an example. When you know what a cup of coffee costs in a well-known retail chain, and and versus how much the coffee picker receives as the salary. And if that's opened up, if this black box is opened up, then a lot of pennies will drop. And also, who controls the value chain? Who are the corporations behind that? Is it going back to the communities? Things like that. If we know more about this, I think
It's a
there's
good
hope.
start then, yes.
I think as for me, I think we're gonna talk about the how friends, smallholders, friends are being happy or their welfare is being increased is that we measure it, right? And I think nowadays we're not only talking about the growth. We're not only measuring the welfare of the smallholder is not only based on the productivity or the income, but we also talk about the resiliences, right? And the sustainability, of course. And this is inclusive because we need to build the human of everyone. I'd like to, if I may, to show you another slide that I've prepared. Actually, I have 2 slides, but then anyways, at Pisagro, since this year, we're trying to measure the welfare because at the end of the day, we're talking about the inclusivity, we're talking about partnerships, we're talking about how to give accesses to our friends. But then how then we make sure that they're actually happy? How do we make sure that the welfare are increased? So we established this a lot of indicators. We're trying to align with global, regional, and national indicators and criteria how to measure the welfare. We came up with 113 indicators:
That's a lot.
growth, resilience, and sustainability. And well, actually, if I can show you just that slide, it's essentially we created the dashboard. Ladies and gentlemen, we have this is a real data. This is a real data because at Pisagro, we've already engaged with 1.8 million of smallholder across commodities across Indonesia. But this is not only one. This is probably 50% of the one, and it's a growing samples, right? But we can come up with those dashboard, and this is how we measure the welfare. And long term, this can be used for key stakeholders like financial institutions or governments to measure more and more. For instance, for government policies that would be beneficial for the smallholders, or for the financial institutions that we talked in the previous sessions, that we can come up with interesting mechanisms or interesting financial scheme for the smallholders. That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Colleen?
Yeah. So for us, the way for us to be able to ensure that we are able to get the voice of our farmers down to their really level is that is the creation of our community enterprise organizers, really, because they are to work with the farmers or those that are really at the end there, and of course when as we continue to work with them, we know what they need. Sometimes we assume what they need, or sometimes they also assume what they need, but in reality, they may not be able to see that there are a lot of things that are more necessary than what they can only say, and we can really identify that when we immerse ourselves in their community. That's why it's a community enterprise organizers that we are building, creating.
So I love that. I love how from the start of the session, we talked about, this is how we engage with the different partners. I'm from this sector, I'm from that sector. And then we went into some key challenges that we all face. But the intention is the same. We want to facilitate partnerships and we want to make the system inclusive. But now we're moving towards how are we actually going to do that in reality? So you talked about the use of the value chain and making it more transparent so we know what's happening within the value chain, who are the players there, who's influencing whom, and what is it really doing, especially
Yeah.
to our last mile stakeholders. Ms. Bibong, did you want to add to that?
I think I'm a farmer too, so I can speak a voice of the farmer. Farmer is a consumer, the same with you all, so that everything is a joint work. We all in the same body with the work, the inorganics, and then I think we must do the same spirit for mutual prosperity. So we can do all for us, we can do for all for our work and do all for our dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bibong. So just to reiterate, she thinks that, especially as a farmer, we can do more, especially for the farmer's work and for the farmer's dignity. And I think that's a key word to come home with today, which is everyone's dignity. Regardless of where we're coming from, regardless of what status we carry, we all have some innate dignity with us. And I think, yeah, it's something we always have to remember when we engage with people and we engage with stakeholders. And of course, Sir Insan, you talked about putting indicators as well to make sure that when we do interventions, when we work with other people, the work we actually do creates impact and that this is something that we can improve on if we can hopefully quantify and measure it. But as Ms. Colleen mentioned, it's also about making sure that there are hearts and faces behind those numbers and to make sure that as we evaluate, as we map out the value chain, as we put in indicators, we also do it with the farmers and with the stakeholders in order to ensure that what we think we need is actually what they really need and what it needs to be measured is what is really being measured. So I think that's a quick wrap up of what was just discussed. So in a sense, moving forward into the discussion, I would want to know if these are, I guess, how potential ways by which we can improve stakeholder engagements. What recommendations moving forward must we push forward? Where do we, I wouldn't say like where do we start, but what can you recommend in terms of the next steps in order to ensure that after the forum, not only will this conversation continue, but at the same time, we can actually move forward with something that could be concretely effective as a result of what we discussed here today.
Um, it's a very powerful question. I think first off is to be able to map out the stakeholders in the area. I think providing or helping our friends as smallholder, we need to have an end-to-end process, right? We need to have an end-to-end support from the producing side to the consuming sides as well, from the governments to the financial institutions, or from the academics or startups as well that can involve. So this is key. Mapping out, identify who are they that can support the smallholder.
Sir, if I can just intervene, if you remember during our very first session in the forum, We Solve Foundation is doing that right now. That's why we presented it during the first day. They're mapping out the agricultural sector. So they did present the link to the website, so you can check that out.
So essentially, that is essentially inclusivity, sustainability. That's it. It's how that we're making sure that these partnerships could be well established. Thank you.
I think for us, it's just to continue the hard work that we are doing and sharing the stories that we are creating, so we can continue to inspire and motivate others to join us in this mission of helping the farm.
Yeah, I'm not an activist, so my point's a bit different, I think. But what Ms. Bibong said resonated to me when she said farmers are also consumers. I think one important aspect is that there is a systemic bias against people living in rural areas, right?
Yes.
All the decisions are made in cities. All the capital is concentrated in cities. All the infrastructure is concentrated in cities. Basically, we're treating the rural areas as our resource pool. That's where the food comes from. That's where the energy comes from. That's where all our ecosystem services come from. Maybe when we're on holiday, we go to the rural areas, but that's about it, right? And what's really important is that we, in the spirit of inclusivity, that we have to recognize that without a viable, livable rural area, the system's going to collapse, right? There need to be people in the rural area. They need to have a decent living in those areas, and they need to be passionate about producing food or producing whatever else they want to produce, right? Let's not forget the farmers are the ones not just producing food, but also looking after our environment, right? Are we paying them for that? So what about the market system there, right? Things like that. So they're also often the guardians of our culture. All the traditional culture that's been talked about is in the rural areas. You know, the government doesn't make culture. So once we start valuing these services that not just farmers, but rural residents in general are providing to us as city folk, and of course I can all say, oh, my dad was a farmer and so on, but more or less, I think we're all city dwellers. So we're all guilty of what I'm talking about. If we don't value the services provided to society by rural dwellers, there's always going to be this imbalance, this inequality. And I think we have to work with ourselves to really overcome these systemic biases.
If I can, Ms. Bibong, before I go to you, I just wanted to do a quick follow-up. In terms of defining or perhaps leading the way towards valuing, quantifying that services, those ecosystems, those social services, who's supposed to be leading the way? Who do you think, sir?
Everybody.
Any pinpoint person?
I think, all the sectors that we were talking about before, government needs to start planning for rural areas, not just for cities. Where do our resources for our cities come from? We need to start planning for rural areas. Private sector needs to look at their value chains, as we talked about before, and push benefits down the value chain so that those producers also get their fair share, right? And so on and so forth. And probably, I think Ms. Bibong said before that, the farmers can do more and can be more vocal. I know in Australia, for example, yes, indigenous people could have a much stronger voice if they would unite and talk with one voice rather than many. So we all have to work on that. And unfortunately, it's a complex problem, so the solution will most likely not be easy.
Definitely. Ms. Bibong, any recommendations that you think could really help farmers get their voices heard and also acknowledged within bigger decision-making spaces?
Okay, thank you. I think when we talk about the economic, when we talk about the food, especially for foods, especially in the climate change problem, in all of us is have a challenge that we must knowing about your food, about your everything come from. Maybe from farm to table, from farm industrial product to our for wearing everyday clothes and something. But I think we just not only buy and sell product, but we talk about the spirit. it is very difficult for all of us, but we must do beginning for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bibo. I love hearing your answers. So, as consumers, farmers are also consumers, but as people generally, we have to remember that it's not just about buying or selling products. We have to remember that there's a spirit behind it, the purpose and the person behind it, which I think would make all of us more mindful in the way we make decisions, we make purchasing decisions, but also, I guess, in the way we allow or disallow certain things to happen all across. So, in that sense, I guess I wanted to uh, touch base on maybe some practices that you've seen work when it comes to, because you've all had years of work when it comes to engaging with stakeholders. Any key practices or tips and tricks that you've seen work when it comes to establishing partnerships with organizations or stakeholders, or maybe engaging with stakeholders, highlighting what's local, that you think you can share with the audience with us here today?
Okay, I'm first. What works really with GK is with God Kalinga is actually building a relationship and open communication always. It's not transactional, but it's really our desire to build that connection where we can both share benefits and the risk in the things that we do, and when we engage them and make it personal to them in helping our farmers, that's really what works in what we do.
So I can just give an example from Laos, to which I'll be traveling after this conference. We put quite a bit of support into Laos, being one of the more disadvantaged countries in ASEAN. But Laos has made great strides towards building a policy for sustainable agriculture. I would say one of the front runners in ASEAN. And they have institutionalized as a standard throughout the country, whether smallholders or big companies, the GAP, good agriculture practice. And we do see GAP as a sort of a first step towards sustainable agriculture. Now, the problem in Laos was that the government does not have the capacity to monitor or to ascertain whether farmers are abiding to GAP or not, right? So how do you overcome this problem? And I think the solution is a very innovative one, which was called participatory guarantee system. Basically, other farmers making sure that farmers are following the GAP standards. If you think about it, it's not too dissimilar from what we talk about as blockchain, except there's no digital involved. It's just communities making sure as a community that all the farmers within that community are following the same standards. And that is accepted by the government as a guarantee. And therefore the policy is sort of kept. It takes a while to build the capacity and to roll this out throughout the country. Of course, there's lots of remote areas where there needs to be some awareness raising. But I think that's a great way to involve the community in uplifting their own standards.
I love that. Actually, bit off topic, but I know someone's doing that in microfinance as well, in a sense that they tap the women, because at least within the Filipinos, we love to gossip and to rumor. So it's like the women actually making sure that the other person pays. If not, they're going to be talked about. And it's been effective. I think it was like a literal 90%, I think, success rate. So I can see how that works.
This is not a new concept, but it's just been adapted for this purpose.
And I love how they use actual local routines, norms, cultures in order to make sure that from a community level, you actually advance what you want to advance. And I think it's a perfect example of how we put the community at the forefront and at the center of what needs to happen. Sir Insan?
I'll be very quick. I've seen examples of certain commodities that have been well implementing the inclusive policy models. I can speak of on behalf of palm oil working groups or potato working groups, corn working groups, cocoa working groups. So all of these working groups, what I learned is that they have people on the ground. They have people on the ground who not actually just, as you've mentioned, transactional. It's building relationship, building schools, building health clinics, and that's just a start. Because we want to have a long-term relationship. We want to have a sustainability. We want to establish inclusivity. So I think being there is really important. And I've seen cases from those working groups or commodities that I've mentioned earlier that they are there. And also that to make sure that the project is interlinked to other bigger or other projects as well. It's not like having 2 or 3 separate projects, but actually those projects should be sustainable and linked to each other. That's it.
Ms. Bibong, what has worked for farmers when it comes to really engaging them and making sure they're part of the conversation? What have you seen work? No worries. We can do it again. What have you seen work for farmers when it comes to say people or organizations trying to partner and engage with them and also get them to share in the decision making?
Okay, thank you. For our point is the collaboration. I think it's a collaboration. We must strengthen the connection between the multi-stakeholder, farmer, local government, indigenous people, private sector, consumer, academic, etc. But and then we knowing about our position, each other, and then we work from below level, from bottom to up, not bottom, not up to going back. And then we working for long term, and then we need time for the all processing. I think we must to be patient about it, especially working with the community, farmers, and etc. Thank you. Just only this collaboration.
Thank you so much. So I guess to highlight the points mentioned here from the start to the end, it's about like how do we foster partnerships, stakeholder engagements in a sense that is inclusive. One is to know what's actually out there. So it helps, to put it concretely, to map out the system, to know who are the different stakeholders and what roles you play and what asks or requests the other person would need in order for them to also do their job better. And then the second point is to listen, to make sure that once you know who you're speaking with, or when you're put in a position to speak with another, you actually listen to them and you actually actively listening. Actually, after this forum, I invite you to actually try active listening. So maybe in a sense, go get a partner and then have that person speak about any random topic for 3 minutes. And all you have to do is listen intently to the person and see how well you do it. Because oftentimes we hear things, but we don't listen. And I think that's something that organizations and individuals both have to learn. The third one is to make sure that we focus still on relationship building, on trust, on ensuring that we have the numbers, because it's important for different organizations, different people to hear the numbers, but also that we remember to also put relationships and the farmers, the stakeholders at the forefront and at the center of the conversation. So I think those are 3 key points that we've built on here today. And the fact of the matter is that we're all trying to do something. What's important is that we work together, as Ms. Bibong said, to collaborate. Because at the end of the day, what works best from the farmers themselves, they say, it's to collaborate with each other, to trust it. It takes time, as Ms. Bibong said. It takes time but it's what works, and we have to hold hands throughout this journey. And at this point, I would like to open the floor to any questions you might have for our panelists here today. We have time for actually only one question because we're running a bit late. Sorry about that. So for anyone who might want to ask a question, you can ask. If not, well, oh, okay, yes. Sorry, guys, no eating yet. Sorry, Mike. Yes, it's on its way.
Hello. And so since the IPs are always mentioned as the one of our frontliners in the agriculture and environmental advocacy, I'd like to ask our beloved panelists if were there efforts to constantly communicate with the NCIP or the National Commission for the Indigenous People on each of the organizations? Was there constant dialogue and collaboration with them? Since NCIP is
I
the
think
government arm.
generally, the NCIP is more Philippine-based, but I think to put it broadly, since we're all coming from different countries, is have your organizations communicated with indigenous communities or commissions as you do your work? Well, for government, then we'll have Sir Clemens.
So for me, the answer is quite easy. No, but we have a new government now in Australia, and we're currently formulating what we call the indigenous-led foreign policy, which means we're now finally recognizing our indigenous people, one of the oldest living cultures in the world, as part and parcel of the society. And we want to take what's unique to Australia to communicate with other indigenous peoples around the region, ASEAN, basically Asia Pacific. So we have not been doing a good job, including indigenous peoples. We have to acknowledge that. And we're trying to do better now with formulating a strategy on how do we really approach this. And in my field, one important way of doing this is by applying the concept of food sovereignty. We've talked about food imports. We've talked about decrease in agrobiodiversity, everybody eating the same thing and so on. Food sovereignty works towards that food should not only be sufficient, not only be nutritious, but also culturally appropriate. And that's a concept that we're following now.
Do you want that?
Well, currently, we are not yet in touch actually with any indigenous group in the Philippines, but as Bayan Anihan, but I think as Gawad Kalinga organization, we are also in contact with them. I'm just not really sure if we are also in negotiation, but in dialogues with any government agencies.
Thank you for the questions. At Pisagro, no, we don't have a direct communications with the indigenous people, nor the smallholder. However, our member are communicating with them. And I would say more recognitions also happening in Asia for the indigenous people. And government has now pushed companies or other organizations as well to include these indigenous people within their projects. For instance, there has been a lot of project called social forestry in the forests in Indonesia, in Kalimantan, in Sumatra Island. And these social forestry are being implemented for the indigenous people. So then indigenous people would have alternative livelihood for them. But not only that they could be part of the supply chain, but they could have their own livelihood or work or whatnot. So yeah, so that's what happened in I think in Indonesia. I'm not sure if Miss Bibong wants to add something to that as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm in progress, especially me and my team. I'm working for make a research about the indigenous food people in 7 area: Java, Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, Maluku, and then Papua. So it's in progress. I think we have a focus about the indigenous food local, especially for food and seed sovereignty. So I think we all about our research is in progress for the conclusion, and then to make a report. Sometimes we can to share about the indigenous people food, and then and activity for you all. Thank you. In progress. I hope we can to make a collaboration with the indigenous people.
I guess that's something that we really do acknowledge we lack and we ought to include moving forward. We are creating a policy brief post forum to share with our policymakers and stakeholders to ensure that what needs to be done is done. So thank you, sir, for that, praising that, and for, I guess, reminding us that there's so much more work that needs to be done. Before I end the floor, any more questions? Last burning questions or concerns? Are we good? Actually, are there online questions? No. Looks like we're good. So thank you so much for joining us here this morning, or actually afternoon. And we look forward to actually knowing more about your work, seeing what more you do post forum. And for everyone here, thank you for joining us.